have been working in the area for about 30 years. Worked with the City of Albany, with Jenny and others. One of my first clients has been starting my business, and I'm located in Portland. What I want to cover tonight is just give you a little background on what we've been able to sort of piece together in terms of the historical, what the city has done with respect to water and sewer rates. And then we're going to look at just the overall financing projections of how the utility funds are looking in terms of revenue with respect to the expenses, and then talk about rate structure options. So we're both looking at the total revenue needs as well as should you make changes to how you recover the revenue from different types of customers. And then we'll talk about next steps. Please, as we go through, ask questions. If that works for you. Yeah.
Sorry, can I jump in for a second? I should have also said, I handed out this. This is for later, so don't let it distract you during Deb's.
Yeah, I was just like, what is that? Doesn't look familiar.
This is the second item on the agenda. Okay. And also, I failed to introduce Jenny, and I think many of you have seen her before, but she has been helping us with this. She's retired from Albany and has worked with Deb a lot, so she's been very helpful.
Yeah, she's been through this process before. And Kevin, I promised you I'd be done, what, by about 5? We've got till 5:15?
Yeah, okay.
Something like that?
Yeah, and if they have some questions.
Okay, great. All right, so starting with the background, utility rates are closely tied to the master planning because a lot of times what drives the need for rate increases are your need to invest in the system. You have very recently updated your master plans for both water and sewer, stormwater as well, but we're going to talk tonight about water and sewer. It gives us a list of improvements that are needed both in terms of as we look at the rates and their ability to cover your costs, but also your systems development charges. We'll be coming back at a later meeting to talk about systems development charges. Tonight we'll focus on the rates. The last water rate increase was in 2012. That's a fairly long time in terms of rate, where we like to see the rates in terms of keeping pace with cost. At that point, there was a financial deficit in the fund, and so it was correcting an issue. It was intended to be the first phase of phasing out your current rate structure and going to a more, what we're calling modern rate structure, and I'll talk more specifically about that. But the next phases were not implemented. So we'll talk tonight about whether what the impacts would be of continuing that process. The last sewer rate increase was in 2015. It was a 10% increase, and it also was intended to be the first phase of a multi-phase process, but only that first phase got implemented. So that's my understanding of kind of where things were and the last increases that you had. As I mentioned, there are 3 components to the scope of work that I'm under contract to do. We'll talk about the first 2 of those tonight. The financial forecast being the overall revenue needs. Do you need to have a 3% revenue increase or a 10% increase, or are you okay where you are? That's the first piece. And then the rate modernization piece is if you were to change the rate structures to reflect where the industry standard approaches are, and actually what your phasing back in 2012 had suggested where you might head, what would the impacts of those be? And we've developed a couple of different options. And then we'll come back at a later date to talk about the systems development charges, which are a part of the funding plan specific to capital improvements for future growth. So they're an important part of the equation, though what I'm going to show you tonight isn't going to be dramatically affected one way or other by decisions you make later about the SDCs. So the financial forecasting is very much like you would do your financial forecast for your home or your business. We project out, it's basically cash flow projections of revenues and requirements do they meet? If there's a gap, then we need to look at potential rate increases. As basically enterprise funds, you need to cover your expenses with the rates. They're not relying on general fund to help fund the systems, and therefore the service charges need to keep pace with those expenses. And as I mentioned, SDCs are part of what's available for funding capital improvements, but those are really limited to those growth related costs. There's some miscellaneous fees for, permit fees and other things, but they're not, 99% of your costs are covered through your service charges. When we look at on the expense side, for you, a lot of it is the contract expenses with the City of Albany that runs the plants, then some other just personnel and materials and services and professional services costs. For the capital funding, we have both your regular routine cash funding of capital improvements, as well as your debt service that have funded some of the plant expansions and things that are part of the mix. We're not projecting at this point in time that you need any new debt, but that current outstanding debt will continue to need to be part of the funding requirements. And then there are contingencies and capital reserves that are an important part of just your overall financial plan and the reliability and the sustainability. And I'll talk a little bit about, this has been a really big focus of the water and wastewater industry, is to look at what is an appropriate amount of contingency and reserves for these type of very, the infrastructure systems, where if you have a break or something, or you have an earthquake or other issue, kind of an emergency, or even because we make investments in large chunks, how can reserves be part of the financial plan process to help just with your overall financial performance. In making the forecast, of course, we have to make assumptions about, and some of the assumptions relate to revenue, which is one of the key things, is how fast are you going to grow? You've had fairly robust customer growth in the short term, and we're projecting, I've worked closely with Janelle and Kevin and now Jenny too, to develop a base set of assumptions about that we can forecast what the revenue in the near and the longer term. We're looking out over, we really try in the next 5 years to be as accurate as we can, and then make some more conservative assumptions about over a 10-year period, so that you can be preparing, really look over that period to, in case you want to smooth in rates over a longer period of time. So really looking at what you know is coming online, and even what you've experienced in the last few years, about a 7% growth rate for residential customers. It's about, I think it turns out to be about 60 new connections per year. But we've assumed that you're going to have flat in terms of commercial, industrial customers, and water use, importantly, since the revenues are tied very much to water use. That, if you get, I don't have to tell you all, if you get one large industrial customer in here, that could really change. Or if you lost an industrial customer, that could really change your situation significantly. So, but at this point, we want to balance your risk, and so we just say, let's assume it's flat, and it'll be important, obviously, to monitor as you go forward, and any big change in something like an industrial customer would definitely trigger the need to look at what the results that we come up with as part of this process. Water use, as I said, is, while it's right now not a determinant really of your sewer revenue, it is very much a determinant of your water revenue. And if we go to a volumetric basis for sewer, then a portion of your revenue, which right now is fixed, all of a sudden becomes variable. And so it'll be even more important if you make some change in the rate structure to continue to monitor water consumption. And the fact that, you know, we are assuming a moderate increase in residential customers. New construction has higher efficiency plumbing fixtures, and if you make changes to the rate structure that, you know, increase the rates for certain users with more discretionary use for like outdoor irrigation, that could trigger some reduction in water use. And so all of these things we have to balance and we take into account in trying to forecast as accurately as we can. On the expense side, we basically take the budget and escalate in conversations with City of Albany, best estimates based on your share of expenses and what they're seeing in terms of just general cost inflation, other costs, and certainly with the capital improvements, adding on some level of inflation. So in terms of the capital improvements, at this point in time, you've got your 5-year CIP, which basically is about $1 million for each of the utilities, water and wastewater. At one of the unknowns at this point in time is what's going to happen at the plant, and because you all pay for a portion of the improvements at both the water and wastewater plants. And so we're in communication with the city about some of that, and we may come back and fine tune some of this after we get additional information. But you can see there's only a couple of projects that relate, I guess, let's see if you could see a couple of projects here that are WTP is water treatment plant. So a couple of things on the water reclamation facility, but at this point in time, not anything major. Yes, do we have new information on that, Janelle?
We don't, but just for
Okay.
everyone's understanding, and we do anticipate some significant projects at the wastewater plant. We're still working on getting information from Albany on what our share is, because our CIP really looks at the next 5 years, and we were looking at their CIP. There's a whole list of projects that aren't in there yet that we need to include. So it's been great having Jenny and Deb involved in this and having done Albany's, because they were the ones who said, wait a minute, we know there's projects out there
Yes.
that we don't have
Yes.
in ours. So we're working on getting that added. And
So
that'll
at
have a
this
big
point,
impact
it's not
on
really in
wastewater.
the numbers, though I'll show you a number that could include some of that. So, great, thanks. Cash reserves, those are the base assumptions with respect to how we forecast the revenues and expenses, and then we're just really looking at the 5-year CIP. The other thing that we've rolled into the baseline forecast is a 6-month operating contingency for each of the utilities, which is translated into about $400,000, that says you will budget that amount and make sure that your rates can cover what we're saying are the operation, maintenance, and capital expenses, as well as generating $400,000 in contingency. There, as I said, this publication just came out from American Water Works Association last year, and it really talked about how the need for cash reserves and different types of reserves. And one of the key ones is obviously the operating contingency. That helps you just in terms of cash flow, but also, you know, emergency reserves, your debt, just being able to make your debt payment. That is also part of the mix. You also have, as part of your unfunded CIP, some additional expenses that could be required should an industrial customer come to town. So at this point in time, we've assumed $500,000 as a reserve. So you can see about $1 million, just under $1 million. We're saying that is the minimum amount that you should have as a reserve at this point in time. So when we look at, are the rates sufficient to cover the costs, we're also saying, and cover this $1 million reserve. We're not going to draw down your fund balance to zero. That would be reckless. So, you know, this, at this point in time, is the $500,000 plus the $400,000. In addition, as Janelle pointed out, there are some significant capital improvements coming on the, we know at the plant. We just don't know exactly the timing. And there are some additional unfunded projects in your water CIP, and there may be things at the plant there. So we, in thinking about how you want to move forward with rate increases, we also need to have that be part of the conversation. Okay, so getting into the numbers in a graphical standpoint. So what this shows you, the bars, each color bar represent a different type of cost. And I've just broken up the costs into a few key areas. You've got your general fund administration, that's the support of the utilities to the general fund, the general services like Janelle's time and probably Kevin's time and various other people's time. The other materials and services, the primary one being the contracted services with Albany, that under the water takes care of the treatment and the transmission as well. Capital outlay and debt service, so those are the two components of capital costs. And what I'm showing in this chart is that which is not covered by the systems development charges. So there are a portion of the capital improvements that are funded by, they're intended in the 5-year CIP to be funded by SDCs. That's not part of this picture, and debt service is also supported to some extent by the SDCs. So a couple things that are interesting. This just shows you for like a 5-year period. Shows you your rate revenue, which goes up a little bit. This is with no rate increases, but it does increase a little bit just based on customer growth. But remember, we're only assuming a growth in residential customers and not in industrial, so it's still a fairly flat line. This is your ending fund balance net of those two reserves I talked about, the contingency and the economic development reserve. And you can see that that does go negative without a rate increase. And that's because this line is not sufficient in all years to cover the costs that we're projecting. So, and it's particularly important with respect to, you know, at a minimum, the rates ought to cover your operation and maintenance costs and your debt service. And you can see here by the end of the period, that is not the case. That the debt service, and if the debt service is higher here because we're assuming earlier on that the SDCs are picking up more of the debt service, and by the end of the period, you are not covering your operation and your debt service. This would be a real problem if you hadn't refunded recently your debt, because you had a requirement built into that when it was a state loan, that you would not only cover the operation and maintenance costs and the debt, but some additional amount, like 25% over that. So you would be today not in compliance with that if that were still the case. But because you refunded and it was turned into a full faith and credit, so it's backed by the taxing authority of the city, you no longer have that requirement. So you're okay, but it's not a sustainable situation. You really, as I said, you really ought to be in a situation where you're covering this, because you also have these other capital costs that you have to invest in. And so you can see that the fund balance gets drawn down such that by the end of the period, we would not be meeting the targets. For sewer, it's a similar situation where, you know, you're getting by right now. Luckily you had that rate increase in 2015, and you've had some good growth and strong industrial customer water use and things. So, but you have the same in terms of forecasting where you need to be, and again, being able to cover your debt service plus your operation and maintenance, and really very little capital outlay in addition in this plan, because this awful kind of color is the capital outlay. And right now, because we don't have defined yet the exact timing of those plant improvements, that could really shift these bars up. And as you see, right now, your ending fund balance is going down pretty steeply just based on this forecast, even without those additional improvements added. So you know that the no rate increase over 5 years is not really an option if you're going to be in a position to fund, continue to fund the utilities in this case. So what I did was I ran what I call an inflationary increase, which basically would be 3% per year, kind of a, just CPI, if you will, increase, consumer price index, or, thereabouts as an inflationary estimate. And you can see how this really changes the picture. Now, part of that on the water system is what I showed you before. It only went through 2025. In 2026, your debt drops off because you will have paid that, fully retired that debt. And so that, all of a sudden, you've now freed up revenue that you can now apply to future capital improvements.
Which we may very well need to with what
Yes.
takes place.
Yes, exactly. So that's a great thing. But even still, you will need some kind of, additional increases in the meantime in order to prevent this fund balance from, going negative as it did in the previous graph, and to begin building the capacity to take care of some of what's coming down the road. I mean, very much why we do this and why we look out over 10 years is that you are in a position when the time comes to fund the capital. If you can avoid issuing additional debt, that's going to save you money in the long term and allow you to take care of the system needs. So you can see that based on all these projections, and it is a lot of layers of assumptions that are built in here, but it's the best that we could foresee at this point in time, your ending fund balance would roughly equate to what now has been identified as the unfunded CIP of about 1.8 million. Now, there could be additional projects that become from the Albany estimates at the plants, but you can see that even, and part of this is the beauty of compounding. So this assumes 3% per year, right? So if you say, oh, well, let's have a 3% rate increase and then we'll wait, then that 3% to get to this point in time would be a much larger number. So if you don't, and councils vary in terms of what the preference is. Your history has been to have large rate increases less often. Another approach would be smaller rate increases more often. That's really a policy choice. But no rate increases is probably not
At some point, are you going to talk more about that?
Well,
I have a reason for asking. I had a lengthy discussion 2 years ago with council governments, 3 counties, talking about that very process. And those cities, most of them smaller, who held off like we have done, paid for it dearly for the public every time they did it, as opposed to those who do it annually or every 2 years is kind of a process. My question is whatever you're developing for us something that is a tool that can be analyzed each year
absolutely.
to make this decision every year? So that,
sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to give Janelle the Excel spreadsheet models that we've developed that are based on your budget structure and all of that, and that can be updated every year.
Okay.
Like in the case of Albany, they just adopted, when I did the sewer rates many years ago, a 10-year, they adopted 10 years of rate increases. It was like about 7% per year, wasn't
Wow.
it, Jenny? I don't remember, it was pretty significant. But, whether you adopt a multi-year plan and just say, we're gonna monitor it and change it if we need to, or you take it 1 year at a time, but you have some plan that, okay, we're gonna need to do this every year, that's really your choice. I can run any number of different scenarios. I can tell you, okay, if you want to have 1 rate increase every 3 years, it's gonna have to be X%, or if you want an annual rate increase,
Okay.
it can be, so we can run all of those different
It's a
options.
discussion we need to have.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
okay, thank you.
So this shows you, we just thought we'd start with kind of the baseline, here's the inflationary increase. And the good news is, I mean, that's a great thing. If you could, the trend nationwide is double the rate of inflation is what's needed to fund because of the backlog of capital improvements that most cities are facing. Your water system, at least at this point in time, it looks like you can just be kind of at an inflationary basis. It's not the same case with sewer, but it's good news. And remember, this assumes the 3% begins in 21-22. The reason being is we're leaving room right now, until we have the discussion about the sewer rates, or about the rate structures, that if you want to have a year or two to phase in changes to the rate structure, you can do that without compounding the impacts of the rate structure change with an overall revenue increase. Because customers, when you change rate structure, some people are going to win and some people are going to lose, right? You're going to have some people that are going to go up 10% just because you changed the rate structure. You don't want to compound that with saying, oh, and then we're going to have to add on the fact that we have to have an overall rate increase also. So right now, for the purposes of these preliminary plans, we're leaving 2 years for you to make rate structure changes before adding on the revenue increase. So in this case, this is the sewer fund forecast with the same inflationary rate increase. And you can see here that it does put you on a path of meeting the annual, what are projected as the annual needs. But again, this doesn't include much capital. And in fact, the unfunded CIP, in this case, where I've added a couple of projects we know that are on the Albany list for the plant for the next 5 years, at least at this point in time, it says 5 years, even though we haven't seen exactly where that would lay in your plan. That's about $2.5 million, and then there's another $2.5 million in your CIP that's unfunded. So you've got a much larger potential additional need there. So an inflationary increase probably isn't the best idea for sewer. You're going to need something more than that. And remember that the previous 10% rate increase, that was supposed to be a 3-year 10% rate increase. So even then, it was...
You indicated that some cities back east were actually raising their rates based upon projected CIP projects down the road, not actual. I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So you can do that. How do you mathematically, how do you justify the ability to say double the rate increase based upon the comp?
Well, the double the rate of inflation is when we look back over the last 10 years, and we look at people who do surveys nationwide, including utilities in the West, and say, okay, what has your rate increase been? And now let's map out the inflation rate during that same time, and we'll see that it's been at least the average utility rate increases have been twice the rate of inflation to meet both the current needs of those utilities plus whatever they're projecting in terms of capital improvements.
Okay.
These are very capital heavy, financial needs, and so it doesn't keep, inflation is not the best indicator. Yeah, that gives you some idea of how operation and maintenance costs are going to increase, but if you've got a backlog of capital improvements and your rates aren't currently funding capital, then you're going to have additional rate increases. And that's where you are with sewer.
So in short, you can fund a capital reserve
Yeah.
with X amount of
Sure.
inflationary rate.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know a lot of cities who have basically say we're going to have an annual inflationary increase, and sometimes it's tied to a particular index, like a consumer price index, and then we're going to add a certain percentage each year to build the capital reserve. Yeah, that's good financial planning. Okay, so that's where we are on sewer. let's get into the rate structure stuff. Okay, so when we talk about 3% or 10%, that's the overall revenue needs. Now we're gonna drill down and look at, okay, what, in terms of how you're recovering your current revenue from customers, is that fair, equitable, defensible, and in alignment with current industry standards? So basically, the objectives going into this are, let's look at, from an adequacy standpoint, that really is related to your overall financial plan and overall revenue increase. From a rate stability standpoint, we do this long-term forecasting both to be able to phase in potentially rate increases, but also changes to the rate structure. And then when we look at the rate structure, this is where we look at really the equity and the fairness of the rates and charges with respect to, and important considerations are, how do customers impact the system? As an industrial customer, I have a different kind of impact on the system than a residential customer. And that is under cost of service framework, which is the utility, standard for water or wastewater. Those characteristics matter, and that they can impact how we set rates and charges, and I'll talk more about that. Having an objective that at least considers what type of impact these changes would have on particularly large users, that is a valid concern. City of Salem, I've worked with for years, they put in place a long time ago a special industrial rate that recognizes, even from a cost of service standpoint, that the industrial customers on a per unit basis were less costly to serve because they take service off of larger mains. They don't use all the same facilities, and they have very different impacts on the system. So let's first make sure everybody understands the current rate structure. You have two different types of charges. One is a base charge, which are shown here to the right. These are invariant with the volume of water used. They're fixed charges. They vary with the size of the meter. You can see that here. They go up with the size of the meter, which is very typical. That's in part because it's more costly to replace a larger meter. And they differ between the customer classes. So if you're residential, you pay a slightly lower charge in your base charge than if you're commercial and industrial. Then the next component are the volume charges. And this is what we refer to as a declining block rate structure, meaning within the first block, and for a residential customer, that means up to 6 units of water or 100 cubic feet, you pay $2.55 per unit. And then after you get over 6, you pay $2.20. So it actually goes down. This is quite unusual in the water world today. The most common rate structure is a uniform volume rate, where it doesn't matter how much you use, you pay the same rate per unit. Or even that you pay a higher rate per unit once you get over a certain threshold. And 6 is, a fairly common threshold because of the concerns with respect to both water conservation and just sending a price signal to customers that the more you use, we've got to, expand the system, and there's a cost to that, and it's not getting any cheaper. So the marginal cost of that next increment of supply is costly. And so when we talk about being more modern, moving away from a declining block rate structure is the first place to look. Your commercial industrial rates, similar declining block rate structure, but the second block is lower than what commercial or what the residential pay, and the cutoff varies based on the meter size. So it's a pretty complicated rate structure currently. What we've developed as a potential alternative, which is what in 2012, the direction council had indicated it was heading, was to uniform volume rates where all usage is changed at the same rate. Now, in this case, it doesn't mean that all customer types have to pay the same rate. And in fact, there's lots of examples of different rates for different customer classes. And in particular, and I know of concern in this city, is that industrial pay potentially a lower rate based on their usage pattern. And I'll show you in a minute what we've looked at, the different seasonal use requirements. So, but here we've given you a couple of options. You could implement this, if you were to move in this direction, you could look at implementing all at once, which is option one, or you could phase in over like a 2-year period for residential and commercial, who would have, you know, the most significant bill impacts in this case, which is option two. So you can see the current volume rates here, the $2.55 and going to $2.20 or $2 depending on your class. You can also see, this is important, that the percent of use of each class that falls within that block 2. And for commercial and residential, it's about half at block 1, half at block 2. And so, but for industrial, most of the usage falls within block 2. So right now, in a sense, most of your industrial water is charged at $2 per unit as opposed to the $2.55 because 97% of the usage is in block 2. Under this revised structure, we've got the residential and commercial being either all at once or phased into a uniform volume rate of $2.55, and industrial going to all usage charged at $2.03. Now, let me explain a little bit about why this differential is defensible in this case. When we look at the usage, well, so first thing to understand about utility rate setting is that the American Water Works Association manual on utility rate setting has within it basically the standard approach is called the base extra capacity cost allocation approach, which means that if all customers use water the same throughout the year and had the same sort of level of base use, then everybody would be charged the same rate. The same, yes, you would pay more if you use more, but if you had the same sort of profile in terms of seasonal use, and you just kind of use water the same amount every month, then there'd be no reason to differentiate between the unit prices. But that's not the case, and we build the majority of the infrastructure to handle the peak demands. So you've got a situation where, say, in the winter months, your transmission mains are half full because people aren't watering or, taking extra showers or washing the car and stuff. But then on a peak summer day when it's hot and you're irrigating a lot, those pipes are full. So we've got to size the system for that peak demand. And so one of the primary objectives and considerations in setting rates is to look at how each customer class contributes to that peak demand. And here you can see for the residential customers versus your industrial customers, when I say what their usage pattern is, it means this I think was based on 2017 because you were still doing the monthly billing, and so we have good monthly data. You can see, look at that, what happens in the peak summer month of July. You've got 2.1, that peak demand is 2.1 times the average demand for residential customers. And commercial is the same. So it has the same pattern here and peak to average ratio. That's not the case for industrial. Their use is much more flat. yes, they use more water, and yes, they're going to pay a lot more, a customer is going to pay a lot more in their bill because they've got a lot more units they're consuming. But when you have a usage pattern like this, it argues for a lower price per unit because you're not having to, they're not causing that peak demand as much as all of your little residential customers and your commercial customers who double their consumption or even sometimes, triple their consumption during the system peak. So that's a real key to cost of service utility rate making, and that's what drives the differences in rates across customer classes. For Salem, the differential between a residential customer unit of water and an industrial is $1. So, the option I've developed here based on your usage pattern is only about 50 cents, but you see, depending on the community and the type of industrial customers, it can be greater or less. But it is not uncommon to have that type of rate structure. So this gives you a graphical idea of what the bill impacts of just this rate structure change. This doesn't have the 3% inflation in as part of it. This is just if you were to immediately or over a 2-year period go to this uniform volume rate for instead of having some part of your usage charged at $2.55 and part at $2.20, all of it would be charged at $2.55. That is option 2, and that's the dark blue bars. So the dark blue, the bars are along this axis. So this shows you what the monthly bill would be, both the the option 1 bill increase and the option 2 bill increase. So you can see down here, up to 6 units, you're not going to have a change in your bill because that's what your charge now is $2.55 for each unit, and we're not making any changes to the fixed charge. It's once you get into that second block that if we increase the price of that block in option 1, take it halfway between where it is now and to $2.55, and in option 2, take it to $2.55, then these are the bill increases associated with that. So for a customer that uses 800 cubic feet, it's a small increase, and the line shows you the percentage increase. So these are the percentages over here. So in the summer, your average consumption for a residential customer is 2,100 cubic feet, and you can see that falls right about here, which is about a $5 a month increase in the bill, which is just, about 3% increase in the bill. This is just the result of a rate structure change. But in the winter, that customer probably wouldn't see any difference at all in the bill. Somebody that irrigates a lot is, once you start getting up to, double the average, 50 units, then you could see double-digit increases in your bill just as a result of the rate structure change, if it's implemented all at once, which is why we developed this other option, which basically in this case, you could phase it in over 2 years and no one would see really double-digit rate increases in terms of residential based on this. So you could finish moving to that uniform volume rate structure over 2 years, and there would be moderate increases to the bills for some customers during the peak watering season, but overall not anything too painful. Any questions on that? Okay, let's look at commercial and industrial.
So I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
So economies of scale. I mean, if we have the system and people are using, everybody uses up to about 6 CCF per year as an average, that's our average during the summer, it peaks out. Does our cost really because if we're charging the same rate, if I go from 6 to 12, do all of our costs really double? I mean, the transmission lines
No.
are the same, the plant's the same.
Right. You know, no. So from economies of scale, a lot of the costs in the system are fixed. When we look at, you know, it's really, you know, debt service doesn't change, right? Once you've invested in the capacity, the annual or monthly costs, the variable costs are really limited to things like power, chemicals, you know, so if people cut back in use, yeah, you'd see some reduction in those costs, but the majority of the costs wouldn't change. This is less about economies of scale than it is about, you know, using, you know, paying for what you use and your impact on the system in terms of the peak demand. So customers, you know, so the fixed charges are really designed to both recover, well, they recover the costs of, you know, that don't vary with water use, like customer service, meter-related costs, but also are used as a tool to stabilize revenue because so many of the costs are fixed. And if you had rates that were 100% variable, and people, this is what we saw actually 10 years ago, when all of a sudden, you know, we had the recession and things, and customer growth fell off, and people weren't able to pay debt service because so much of the rates were tied to the usage. So having fixed charges, in your case, I think it's about 20% of your revenue comes from fixed charges. So that is a recognition of the fact that no, the costs aren't tied so much to, you know, doubling with the usage, but the portion that you decide to charge through the volume rates are really, you know, designed to recognize the fact that larger customers do have, you know, a greater impact on the system. And in the case of, you know, the residential versus industrial, residential customers have a more of a impact in terms of the peak demands. So, you know, this uniform volume rate structure does figure out what are those costs you're trying to recover and price it out at the average cost per unit, such that you do, if you use twice as much as somebody else, you're going to pay, at least on your volume portion, twice as much.
And that's more my question on that. So to me, the way that our rate structure was structured, I'm assuming when they structured it was they kind of figured that 6 CCF was $2.55 each, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was because that was kind of our fixed cost to operate the system. And if you went over that 6, well, you've already kind of paid for the transmission lines. You've already kind of paid for the maintenance as part of that 55 cents, and that's why they probably dropped it to $2 at that point. My point is just because we double the usage, my costs don't double. So, I mean, I could see it as a conservation method. In other words, to force people to basically go, oh, geez, you know, I don't want to water this much. But as far as cost of the system, I don't really see that being part of that. So that was more of my question towards
I got
that.
you. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, so yes, you could try to do some sort of I mean, part of the problem is, and why most cities have moved away from declining block rates, is the fact that when we look at the next increment of capacity, it's not cheaper. It's way more expensive.
Yeah.
And so you're sending the wrong price signal to customers saying, oh, use more because it costs us less. It doesn't. You know, if we take a longer term view, and I totally get, you know, if you take a shorter term view, and yes, there is that consideration of that if we, you know, increase the amount of water overall that people are using within a certain fixed capacity, that no, the cost is not going to double. But once we go beyond that capacity and it starts driving additional investments, it becomes way more expensive. So it's really looking at a longer view of marginal costs and saying that, and sending a price signal and a conservation signal and it also gets into what has become a more of an objective in terms of affordability, that if people, you know, smaller users, you're preserving and indoor water use, you're preserving some ability to keep the rates, more affordable on the lower end. If you're giving people who have more discretionary use on the upper end, which oftentimes is for irrigation and things like that, then you're having to charge more on the lower end when that is more the non-discretionary and really needed for just basic human needs kind of thing. So, yeah, that used to be the argument, and there are reasons why people are moving away from that.
I think a prime example of that, and Jenny could probably even address it, you saw it, is Albany. The whole reason that they had to put in, and the Millersburg went in, and the other additional plant was, since they had that declining rate block for a long time, people's usage was going up, and what happened is, in the peak summer flows, they were running out, they didn't have treatment capacity any longer. So now is a mad rush that you got to come in and get that. So that's the downside of the declining block.
Yep.
And it's very expensive when you have to add that capacity, because in this case, we had to do a complete new plant.
So, but shouldn't, I mean, just a whole nother theory on that, right? So if I have to add additional capacity, typically it's because I have new homes going in, new construction, and added capacity to the system, right?
Yep.
Which in turn, to me, would be something that like your SDC should cover,
Yep.
right? So that'd be another, right? Because if nobody else moved in this city, if
Yeah.
nobody else moved in theory, we would never have to build a new plant until that thing, fell off the hill. So,
Yeah.
I mean, but
Yeah.
it's everybody else coming in that's adding to that.
But I think if you look at when Albany had to come in and put the new plant in, you weren't seeing a lot of growth. The problem is because of the rate structure, people
Yes.
you get a real hot summer, and that's what happened is we saw some real hot summers, and all of a sudden, Albany was rationing water.
Yeah.
And then we ran into a facility, when they had a lossage of one of the pumps, we were in a crisis mode where we couldn't even meet fire
Yeah.
flow requirements. So that's what drove it.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much that it was new growth that was coming in, it's because people got so used to those rates, they started using more water. The facilities couldn't keep up when that happened. And then when you have an extended hot summer or something, you can just put your system into crisis.
I mean, this would be a more complicated rate structure, but to go against what you're talking about, to kind of solve that problem, couldn't you do something where it was like to 6, we have this rate structure, then from 6 to whatever, we have our $2. So basically stay on this economies of scale type, just because you use more, it doesn't cost us more. But maybe if somebody decides that, you know what, I don't really care, I'm gonna leave my faucet on all day long because it's, fun. You have at a certain point, it actually goes up. So I mean, that's another way to combat that, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's adding a third tier, but that's kind of solving
Yeah.
that problem.
One of the things we have to
So.
keep in mind is the complexity of us trying to build.
I understand, that's why I was trying to throw out different,
Yes.
different concepts of solving
Yeah.
that, so.
Yeah, I think that.
Does that really happen though? I'm trying to think if the hot weather makes me use my water more, other than watering my lawn.
That's where the biggest usage is that's what drives your summertime use,
Yeah.
peak demands.
My bill probably triples because all my wife's flowers and gardens and stuff. But, if Albany has a billing, pricing process that designed to encourage conservation, and we don't, there's a ethics issue between the two cities, I think.
Well, what would happen is Albany will come back and want to renegotiate what our percentage of all of our capital costs are, because we're representing a larger portion of the
Yeah, that's right.
use.
But then again, part of that is, we purchased a certain part of the plant, and until we run up to that, it's not,
Yeah, but when you go over that, then you're talking about huge expenses, so you got to keep that in mind.
which is a ways after. But again, we shouldn't go over that unless we have new growth, in theory, unless somebody decides to water the lawn more. We shouldn't have more, so, and at that point, if we have to expand it, then we should have SDCs and so forth from that growth, or those industrial customers coming in to pay for that new.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on that.
So unless everybody starts using more water on their lawn, that's really isn't an issue. I
Those
guess. It's my-
facilities are capital intensive, and I doubt that you would have SDCs in place for it.
To cover enough of it.
To cover enough of it, that's the key, because you have to make those investments before the growth comes. And so existing customers end up paying for that.
But there's a lot of different ways you could structure this, lots of different. But I think one thing that Deb brought up that we've been hearing from residents too is fairness.
Yeah.
And more on the sewer side, but what Deb brought up is, do you really want what's happening if we're trying to get to a total amount in the end, and all the revenue has to add up to that total amount, do we really want the base use to be subsidizing the people who are using more? And that's what this
the bottom
structure
line.
does.
That's a good point. That's another twist. That's a good analogy.
Yeah. And again, remembering, so that so much of the system is sized for the peak use, the people who are using more, they're really driving more of that peak use. So it's, when we get looking at, well, should that, the economies of scale argument doesn't hold so much in terms of that argument. So for commercial, you've got more of a potential impact because, remember, the differential between the blocks, instead of $2 and $2.20 or $2.55 and $2.20 is $2.55 and $2. So if you were to move your commercial customers to a uniform volume rate immediately, you would be looking at really significant, potentially some significant rate increases of 10 to 20% for some customers. So, and then again, the 2-year phasing option, really, it would keep the majority of the customer bill impacts below 10%. It's really because your volume cutoff, your block cutoffs vary by meter size. It kind of just depends on your meter size and your particular usage. But the phasing is a way to to reduce that impact and phase in over 2 years. Your industrial customers here, don't be alarmed by this. This is a much different scale. So it tops out, these are all under 2%. They would hardly notice a difference because most of their usage right now is charged at $2. But under this approach, it would be $2.03. So it's less than a 2% increase. And again, it's supported from the cost of service principles and the fact that they use water very differently than residential customers.
Deb, can I ask?
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember what you told us before. When you looked at the distribution of the funds or the costs, whatever, between the different classes, between residential, commercial, and industrial, and then looked at what the changes would need to be, did you try to keep industrial pretty much the percentage of what spending is right now? Or are they funding more or less under this change?
They would be on a percentage basis, I think, and I didn't look at exactly, okay, how much revenue is industrial generating now versus, percentage-wise. This isn't a huge change, but, obviously you're moving your residential and commercial for all their use. If you were to move it all to the 255, they're going to go up slightly. And I think it's somewhere I think it was about a 3 to 5% increase overall for residential and commercial, whereas industrial would only be going up about 2%. So there'd be a slight change in terms of, are, industrial customers being subsidized? No. In fact, you could argue that, they could, from a cost of service standpoint, they should be paying a little bit less. It's not a huge shift at all, but yeah, it's
just, it looks like the percentage increases are so much more for the residential and commercial than industrial. I just wanted to clarify that it's because the volume is so much greater with industrial, their percentage is less.
Exactly. Yeah, percentages are difficult because, when applied to a very large bill, it's still, a small percentage can still be a lot of dollars.
2% of $1,000 versus 1% on $1 million is a huge difference.
Yeah.
So I missed a little bit of it. How does that discussion weigh against Scott's discussion about the increased volume, they're getting reduced rate because of volume?
Well, they're getting increased. The reason that
They're steady.
is arguing for a lower per unit cost for industrial is not so much an economies of scale argument. It's that when you look at the usage and in particular the peak use, the peak to average use is way lower. It's much smaller. They use water pretty evenly. So you're not investing in that peak demand to meet the needs of industrial customers. That's driven by your residential customers who have huge swings in their usage during the summer, and even to some extent your commercial.
Is that two customers, basically, Duraflick and GP? Is anybody?
Well, this includes, so I think there are 5 or 6 customers
Okay.
here. Some of them have multiple meters, so,
Thai
yeah, it's
Square,
like
which is-
ATI.
High Square, I forgot what's in
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Oh, not big.
there's a
Okay.
hand of Georgia Pacific.
One,
Yeah.
one thing through this whole exercise, and it applies more to sewer than water really, but is also us going back and looking at how our customers are classified and making sure they're in the right classification for what they're actually doing,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of, why was somebody put in commercial versus industrial for some of these
Yeah.
businesses is a little hard to say. So we
Yeah.
need to go
We
back
still
through
have some more
and
work to do on
look at all
that, but
those.
yeah.
We've started that process.
Yeah.
These examples are using what we have for industrial,
Yeah.
not generic.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. We, poor Kim, we we pulled lots of billing data
Okay.
to look at exactly your customers. Yes, good question. All right.
Don't- Industrial though, like if we get a big industrial user, they could be the one that drive the expense on the front end to upgrade everything. So wouldn't a residential person say, well, why are they paying less than us? Because if one big one comes into town, you have to redo the whole system for them, not us, right?
Might have to.
Well,
Because we're talking about residential building essentially a fund for bigger infrastructure. Well, what happens why wouldn't industrial math apply there?
well, everybody's going to contribute to that. So we haven't,
Sure.
everybody's going to pay to these capital improvements, and industrial is going to pay a lot more per customer because they use a lot more per customer.
Sure.
But, yeah, I mean, there may be some improvements that are needed to accommodate a major user, but that's also going to bring in a lot more water use, which it just depends on how it all shakes out in terms of whether that would be a net gain to the system or a net, increase in terms of, how much usage they're adding, what additional infrastructure is needed.
If you had a larger water customer, they're gonna be paying a lot more.
Sure, and that's, I think, but it also, I always go back to kind of like Scott's argument. To me, it's all the same because the industrial usage is taxing the system more all year long. So if you're gonna have breakdowns or maintenance issues.
Yeah, but they're not taxing. If residential was the same, if they
Right.
stayed the same throughout the year, they're not taxing. What's taxing the system is your
Peaks.
your peaks
Yeah.
within residential during the
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah, your transmission lines, your treatment plant for, and most of those, based on the maximum day usage, the lines also based on, peak hour in some cases, the reservoirs, everything, so,
To me, that's kind of the nature of the beast. It is residential because they water lawns. It's kind of the way it's always been, kind of the way it's always going to be, and we're trying to pull them back to, being the same all year round. We're basically trying to penalize them for having those peaks, and it's just kind of the nature of the beast. So I'm not sure. I mean, to get residential to be a flat line all year long, unless somebody gets rid of their lawns, isn't going to happen, and stop washing their car. So that's just kind of, to me, you take both of those and you say, this is what the system is, and this is what it has to take, and you build past that, so for that. And anyways, that's just my 2 thoughts on it.
Unless you can convince it to rain more.
yeah.
Unless you can convince it to rain more, or there's another way to solve it, but to basically penalize them for watering their lawns, to me, doesn't, I mean, that's just
I
the
don't
way
think
expensive
you're
they want.
penalizing them. You're saying you use your water differently, and because of that, you pay differently.
Yeah.
Well, but
You're not using
exactly.
it the same as an industrial customer where you have a constant rate all year
But you're
round.
giving the industrial customer a volume discount.
Well, no, 'cause
Right,
if you look at what our customers pay for the system overall, they're paying a lot larger percentage-wise than a residential customer. The problem is if we could come in and design our system, if we knew that our residential customers were the same as our industrial customers, we would have a lot lower costs. We wouldn't have to have 26 million gallons capacity peak in our reservoirs for treatment capacity. That's a fact. If you were the same, we would probably be down around 50, probably half, potentially.
Well, and all the little lines
Yeah.
that serve residential and, reservoirs and pump stations, all of those things, driven so much by that peak demand that
All the
is
beaver leaks.
caused by,
Yeah.
potentially by the residential customer. So, yeah.
But I mean, you could make that same argument for the industrial guys. If they conserve water more and they use 25% less water, then that would save our system also. I mean, so I see the arguments on both sides, but I'm kind of hearing on the industrial side, we're basically saying we're going to give you a volume discount because you use the same amount of water all year round, where residential has a peak. So we're not going to give you any sort of a volume discount on it, even though our fixed costs are the same during the winter as during the summer. So I guess that's my beat there. I just don't really see a point in that. I understand to try to get them to conserve water. I get that argument. I don't really like that argument, but that is an argument.
So the cost base rates, the 255 versus the 203, is not, part of why you might implement that is to encourage water use, but it's also separate from that, it's just the cost to serve them. Because you're recovering throughout the year, that 255 recovers the extra capacity cost that you're building into the system and maintaining year-round, whether they're using it or not, for that summer peak. Industrial's also paying for their share of the peak year-round through their rate, but because it's a lesser portion of their total, it ends up being a lower rate per unit. So it's based on the cost of service. It's not a penalty rate, or it's just reflective of the usage characteristic.
Just cost of
It's
maintenance.
a policy option. Yeah, it's a policy option. We could develop a rate that was just uniform for all customers. That's going to be a significant impact on your industrial, who currently pay $2, per unit, if we were going to some blended rate for all customers. So this is just an option to look at a different, if you want to move to a uniform volume rate structure, to look at it by class, or you can, have one rate that applies to all customers, or you can stay with your current rate structure. I mean, these are all options. We, because this is, one of the objectives was to look at what is the industry standard today, what does Oregon Water Resources encourage utilities to do in terms of, pricing. Albany is the only city I know in Oregon that charges a declining block rate structure in addition to Millersburg. So if you're going to make a change, there's a lot of cities that and districts that charge just a single uniform volume rate for all customers. In your case, you have a lot of industrial demand, and it's going to be a significant impact if you go to one blended rate. But you have to look at it from the perspective of all your customers.
So are you saying that Albany charges the same way we do? They have a declining rate block structure that as we do now. So okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
So one way you could look at numbers, and to do this to great accuracy would be a huge effort. It's not probably worth it, but the concept of it, you could look at our water master plan and say, because it lays out what is our average day demand, what is our peak demand. You could look at that and say, okay, what would you have to size your system for this average day demand? And then now what have we built it to for this peak demand? And look at the difference and say, okay, that's what we should charge people, some ratio of that for what they go above, what their peak flows is. But I think you would find that number is hugely out of alignment with reality of what you could charge somebody.
Yeah.
So conceptually, I understand what Deb's saying as far as this is why the industry's done
This is
what
why
it
people are
has.
charging.
Yeah, no, I get
Yeah.
I get that thought process. Like anything else, there's multiples of them. So yeah. So
Exactly. Okay. Just to keep moving along here, let me just talk about the sewer rates, and then we can have additional discussion on what other options you want to see. So for sewer, obviously, so right now, these are current rates. Flat charges for the majority of customers, residential, so no, it's not impacted by water use. Most of your commercial pay this minimum charge of $69.63. Doesn't vary, it's not, tracked with water use. You've got about 15 customers that at some point in time, a special rate was calculated for them. It's probably based on their usage at some point in time. Not really sure. But in any event, the majority of the customers pay these flat rates. Then you also have what City of Albany charges for monitored industrial customers, which is a flow and strength-based loading series of charges, which can be added on if somebody is extra strength, above domestic strength. But that only applies to one customer currently.
It'll be two now, yeah. So, can you go back to that slide for just a second? So just to make sure everybody understands, so the commercial and industrial customers, other than the one, now will be two, they only discharge from offices and things like that. So they're normal strength waste,
Domestic.
not industrial process discharge. So that last item is only for industrial process water at this point.
Yes.
And we only have
One.
one now, just coming online now, a second customer who fall in that category.
Yeah, and one of your industrial, at least one, does pre-treatment, so what they discharge to your system is actually domestic strength, so.
So also the large customers, the 15-ish that are based on some prior established volumes, we've tried to figure out how they were charged. We're still working on that, but
That's why we're,
it's
yeah.
only 15 of them, but our largest ones are in there, so biggest,
Yeah.
revenue is coming from those.
Yeah, so.
It looks like it's pulled out of the sky.
We've got a little
Well-
more sorting out there to do, just so that we can make sure that when we calculate, what they should be charged in the future, that there's a good understanding of what the basis for the current is and what the impact will be of any change. So what we've done at this point in time, though, is I can give you an illustration if you were to go to, so looking at what's a modern sewer rate structure, it's a rate structure that does take into consideration volume of water used, because water use goes down the drain in terms of indoor usage and becomes a impact on the sewer system. So the trend and the standard now is for residential customers to charge based on the average winter use, because that's an indicator of the sewer flow. Commercial and industrial tend to be based on actual water use. If you have a customer that has large amounts of irrigation, you can make some exceptions or have them install a separate irrigation meter or something like that. There are workarounds for that. And obviously industrial, who has monitored sewer, we can just charge based on the actual sewer flow. But most customers, you don't monitor the sewer flow, you monitor the water that comes in. So we have developed an illustration here of what a volumetric base would be for the majority of the customers, say, the domestic strength, residential and commercial. And this is just, again, a revenue neutral structure. So moving from a fixed, completely fixed, to some fixed plus volumetric component. When you're moving from about $50 a month base to some combination of base and volume, obviously you're going to have, there's the potential for some really significant swings up and down here. Those who are on the lower end of things can really benefit and have their bills go down dramatically. Those who use more water can have large swings in the opposite direction.
I might mention here, as I was going door to door last fall, this was a big topic, and this approach was highly valued by everybody that talked to me.
Good to know.
It was. Hey, by the way, tonight, before this meeting, I got hit up by two of these guys right here who are snowbirds. Their concern being, why haven't you fixed my problem yet where we're still paying all this high price in the winter?
Got
Say,
it.
well, this is what we're talking about going to. Concern, and they raise a good point. Well, if you're gonna base my sewer on my wintertime water bill when I'm not here in the wintertime,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
win-win.
Yeah.
So,
Well-
but that's probably a handful of people, but
Yeah, in there you have to use some sort of an average, or you can base it on the number of people in the household or something like that. Yeah, it does administratively,
Well,
that's,
typically, they're elderly couples.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
They don't use much anyway.
yeah. So this just gives you an example of what happens when you switch here from, across the board, flat charge, no matter how much you use, to, okay, say we go to $35 a month as the fixed, and it was $2.80 as the volume component. And you can see that it's really, at a certain point, the blue, which is the current, is higher than the green, and then it's gonna switch, and then you're gonna see the green be higher than the blue. And as you can see here, well, a $15 a month reduction in your bill, people are gonna be pretty happy about that.
Pay for the water bill.
Yeah, exactly. The flip side is on the upper end, and remember, it's charged based on winter water use, so you're not gonna be penalized when you're watering your flowers in your garden. It's that base use that you establish in the winter. So really, in the winter, average is about 500 cubic feet. So even, this is like several times higher than the winter average. Most of your customers are gonna fall, more within this range here. But still, that person who, the flip side of the $15 reduction is some people could go up 20, 30, dollars a month. It could be
10
significant.
household members or something.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of
Yeah.
showers.
So, we are, we've got, I think, good data. We're ready to roll on, for the majority of the customers to have a rate structure, volumetric-based rate structure. This could also be phased into, increments too. This just shows you the all at once kind of impact, but that could be phased as well.
One of the things I just want to mention here that we deal with is, the mayor mentioned, we get a lot of people that think that we shouldn't charge them anything for sewer when they're not here. And what we tried to explain to them that this will really help with is we have a base cost for having the system available.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Get back to the
so
fixed cost.
we'll be able to let them know, that's 35 is their base cost for having it all year, we're having that service available to them. You won't be charged for your volumetric when you're not there.
That's right, yeah.
I
Yeah, I
think,
guess
I think
in
that'll
the-
flush. I think we get that to work.
Yeah.
We have some who don't even want to pay base rate.
Well, they
So we'll have to
they
have
can
those
move on, but-
conversations.
They can always,
They just figure they're not here, they're not using this system, so they don't understand
You
what
can just
happened.
take
They
the
can always
pipe
put a,
out and
shut
start
off.
and put it back in.
Yeah.
shut off valve on sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just to summarize, two components, the financial planning component. You are going to need some rate increases in the next 5 years to continue to meet both current operating and funded capital projects. You've got flexibility, though, in terms of how you phase that in, how you smooth it. You could, it's really your choice of, do you go with fewer, larger, or more frequent, smaller increases. Sewer probably need larger increases due to anticipated capital needs. And before we're finished with this process, I think we will get some more information from Albany on when would be reasonable to program in some of those additional costs. But because, you are generally right now covering your costs, and you've got some pretty good reserves and SDC revenues coming in from just the growth that you've had, you could defer for a couple of years to allow you to make some of these rate structure changes, some which are supported more probably by residential customers than others. Maybe they wouldn't be as happy about the water, but they would certainly, some customers would welcome the sewer change. The uniform volume rates by class is an option. I can develop other options for you. No class, just one single uniform volume rate, or, whatever else you might want to see. We've shown that phasing in would certainly moderate that impact for some of the customers. And we're going to do a bit more work on that 15, because we really need to, similar to the water, we need to really focus in on some of those above domestic strength. What really should they be paying? And once we have that, then we've got the rest of the revenue that the domestic strength residential and commercial should be paying, and then we'll set the rates to achieve that amount. So we still have some more work on the cost of service side of things with respect to sewer. But it is going to have significant bill impacts up and down, but it's good to know that that is, something that is of interest to the community.
I just want to add clarification on the above domestic strength commercial and industrial customers. So what we're looking at as we're going through the customers is, well, what are they actually doing with what's actually going down the drain? So we know the ones who have an actual industrial discharge, process water, that's taken care of, that's pretty clear, but things like restaurants or truck washing, or there's different classes that we can put them in, or groups, however we're calling that, that maybe they pay a different rate because what they're putting down the drain is a higher strength. Doesn't mean it's a process discharge.
That's right.
It's still, it still has a bigger impact on the
RV
system.
dumps.
And this is
RV
actually,
Keep getting to bring that on up. The
Yeah.
RV dub thing kind of concerns me.
this is actually an area where Albany was on the forefront of implementing a rate structure that was it's very complex, but it's also intended to be more equitable in that they have different levels of strength just for regular commercial customers. So you're either a high, medium, low kind of strength customer, and you pay more per unit if you are a restaurant or a mortuary or an automotive, something that has a potential to be discharging a higher strength waste. So, yeah.
Anybody have a concern whether or not Albany and Millersburg should be on the same conceptual process in terms of volume discount or not?
Well, Albany does it though.
They do have it now.
They have a volume discount,
I
right?
know,
They have
I
a
understand
different
that,
rate
and
structure,
so do we.
Yeah.
So if we were, I know that,
Oh,
that's my
sorry.
thought.
Yeah.
So if we were to want to move away from that, it's not really appropriate or fair if we do and they don't, other than covering and building our own financial infrastructure.
Yeah, just keep in mind, our rates are much different than Albany's. Our water rates out here are much lower than Albany's water rates. So I don't know, your method may be less, but if you look at what residents here are paying per unit of water versus what I can tell you I'm paying for a unit of water in Albany is vastly different.
I understand,
So,
I understand, but the basis, the concept behind it, Albany's got all kinds
What?
of different maintenance and growth issues and so forth.
Albany charges us for, based on the flow that we're taking from the plant. And then they're charging us, because they're operating and maintaining the system, for the work they do on our system. So how we recover our costs on that compared to how they recover their costs is completely independent.
So we
Yes.
talked about,
Apples and oranges.
we talked about, however, those peak flows, the impact on the system overall eventually impacts costs.
what we're saying is how you recoup those costs are apples and oranges, as far as
Yeah.
how we
I'm
elect.
thinking about the conceptual concepts in play that drives you to do that. I guess
Well-
maybe I'm overplaying this.
Well, doesn't it come down to we still have a certain amount that's for us?
Yeah,
that we
I
get
know.
one
But-
time on
But
that?
we're not we're paying for what we're using, not when we can go up to that amount. So
Right.
if we have a rate structure that is discouraging that extra use, now if we make that change and their rate structure continues to encourage that extra use within their city, it doesn't matter, because we're paying for the flow that we get. So
It does in that our percentage that we're required to pay wouldn't go up, most likely.
Right, exactly.
It would,
Right,
as far as
right.
what, our percentage that we are required to own up a plant and other
Yeah.
things. Jenny wanted to say
That's
something, I
true.
think.
Well, Albany and Millersburg have this declining block structure unique to anybody in the state of Oregon, because we had inherited, we purchased our water system in the two cities from EP&L. And Pacific Power and Light, they were interested in selling power. And selling water was just like, they had the water coming down for the hydro and stuff like that. And so it was, use as much as you want, we don't care. And so they did declining blocks so that they could bring those customers on to their power grid. It was their sole purpose. And so if you guys went towards this uniform block and beat Albany, who has been trying for years to try to move that way, you're going to get them moving in the same direction faster too,
Yeah.
because they're then going to be the only city in the state that has
Well, we got a meeting Thursday night.
undesirable declining block.
do something different.
Thank you, that is really helpful and really important historical context, that this, it's basically a carryover from a whole different objective of,
Yeah.
pricing. So,
And
yeah.
and one of the reasons Albany's rates are so much different is because when Albany bought the PP&L system, it was trash. I mean, they've had to completely rebuild it. Luckily, most of our infrastructure out here is newer,
Right.
so.
And we have a lot of water available to us as well, but, and yes, newer infrastructure, but still, there's a cost for that, and over time, it'll get old. And,
Yeah, but do you want to recover that via a rate increase across the board, or you want to try to recover some of that cost by getting the people who were using peak demands during the summer? I mean, so it's just, how do you want to recoup those costs?
Well, I think it's a mix.
So-
Yeah.
So with that question, and I don't mean to circumvent this, but where are we going with the process?
Well,
Where do we go from here, and at what
next
point?
steps.
Right here.
Well, so we basically have, I think, for water, with the only other thing we have to do there in terms of the financial plan is to confirm with Albany any, future capital costs. But that is poised, ready to, if you want to see other options, or, either on how to phase in the overall revenue increase needs, the inflation versus something else, or you want to see any other rate structure options. We're basically at a point that I think we're good to go there. Sewer, we have some more work, and then can bring you back what I think are the final numbers that we're comfortable with. These are just very preliminary numbers. The water are more, I think we're, in terms of having good numbers there, we're there. It's just a question of where do you want to take it. So, and then we have the SDC analysis that we'll sort of be focusing on to also bring that back to you here in the next couple of months. And, but in terms of the right time to implement changes to your rates, your water rate structure would be fall after the peak season, either to, is a great time to implement. So, if you have, I don't know, if you want to have additional discussion tonight or at your next meeting, whatever, about what you would like to see, so that we can have a calendar kind of how, if you want to implement some changes to the rate structure, when you might do that, and when, additional rate increases we'd like to see there.
Question for Kevin. Let's say the data is all collected, you've done your work. Kevin, do you see staff developing recommendations for the council to consider and having it in a work session?
Well, that's essentially what we're here. So what we're recommending is we look at what you saw tonight as far as the rate structure and how we would do it. So we would move to the rates, to the new rate structure, use the next our recommendation would go to 2 years, and then look at the roughly 3% for the water. Keep in mind, we haven't done anything with our water rates since 2012.
Right.
And then look at the same with the sewer. We need to run some additional, but in reviewing the declining block and looking at the things, and I think what we want to also keep in mind is you don't want to increase, you don't want to price yourself out from an economic development standpoint for your industrial users also, because having that economic development, or the industry provides a lot to us here, so we need to just keep that in mind. So we were looking at the pros and cons of all of those in a balance. So I think as staff and with Deb, our recommendation is that we would look at what was presented to you tonight. But if you want to look at others, other methods, but looking at that we are the only 2 cities in the state, and knowing that Albany has been working towards it, it seems that now is the time, since we haven't done anything for almost over 7 years now, that if we're going to do it, now's the time for us to look at going to the new rate structure on those. And the fact, and like I said, 2017 was the last sewer increase, and it was actually set to go to 30%, 10% a year for 3 years is what was there. We saw that, we elected after we realized that we missed one, after we found that, and knowing that we were bringing Deb on, we elected not to do anything but wait. So
would you look at tackling both wastewater and water at the same time?
yes, that's our recommendation, to do it
And
this fall.
And we're not quite there packaging it, so you package it as your next step, public hearing, or do we have another discussion and work session?
Yeah, it could go either direction.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably want to bring you back.
The final, once we get the final
with-
numbers.
And
That's on my
then we can show you a
agenda.
combined residential bill. Okay, if you do both the rate structure change on water and wastewater, here's what that bill would be. So, yeah.
Mainly, we need to get an idea of, do you need more from a rate, or if you're comfortable with this moving forward with what you saw tonight and running those scenarios, refining them further and bringing it back to you.
How far behind this is stormwater?
Well, stormwater won't be done until after we're done with this.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I ask a question? Does it matter when the bills go out as to when we want to do this? Because if you're talking about going out of peak season, our bill kind of splits that. We want a bill in October that covers August and September. And August traditionally tends to be another high month.
You could do it January 1, you know, sort of
Yeah.
at the.
Or
that would be
start it.
just- Yeah.
Started in October, it would be,
Yes, so it would take effect October 1st.
Yeah.
And it would
Now-
cover October, November.
Part of it would be your billing system in terms of the sewer volumetric rate. If you're, I don't know.
we're going to a new system, and so
Oh, right.
two things,
We
I
do
don't
need
think,
to
I
look
think
back.
ideally, we'd like to do it all at once, so we put it into place on our new system, so we don't have to go in and change something right off it. So that would be the other thing, and we're going to a new system.
Yes.
So,
When is that gonna happen?
Okay, timing of that, timing computer system, right?
yes.
So what's the timing of that?
What are your thoughts?
Well, they originally, we're starting the process as of July 1st. They originally told us it would be 6 to 9 months. However, we're small. We don't think it's going to take that long. They're going to move 2 years of data. We've done a lot of cleanup on it. We don't think we're going to be perfect, as you well know from the old data, but probably not until the fall before.
So it's all kind of,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it may, I'll know more as soon as I meet with the implementation folks, which should happen in the next week.
So
And
it
I'll
would be nice if this was all figured out and you
Oh,
knew
yeah.
what you wanted to
Right.
do, and
Yeah.
then we were ready to act when we know what the timing
Exactly.
is.
Exactly.
And yes, that volumetric thing that you said, I would want to know how that works, so I could talk to our implementation folks to make sure that that is something they
Most-
can help us program.
most likely, that's what they're set for now. 'cause
Yeah,
that's what
it's
most-
Cassell.
That's what
Have you
most
heard of them?
communities use.
Cassell, it's a big software company within the municipal billing. And
Okay. Great,
I don't think Albany has it, but a lot of other
great,
do.
good. Yeah, and that's probably.
So
Cities
they're
of our-
probably
most
going to.
cities of our size
Yeah,
use.
they're probably going to be just fine with it, but it's
Yeah.
those types of things I want to make sure that we.
I would
tell them.
imagine this is the default, because it's pretty,
Yeah.
this is pretty common for cities to use.
Yep.
Yeah. So excited. Sorry.
So I mean, my thoughts are, as far as the sewer goes and the, you know, the changing the rate structure for the sewer, I mean, I could get on board with that. That makes a little more sense to me, especially using the winter months. As far as the water system, I don't. And the reason behind that is because I believe, you know, people move out here for larger lots. This is why they move here. I personally like my neighbor's lawn being green. So last thing I want is him shutting off his water because it costs him extra, however much money. It is a volume thing. The system's there. We've got the system there. We've got plenty of capacity in it to do that. Albany's on a declining rate structure, so I don't want to be subsidizing them because they look at the operational cost overall for the system and charge us a percentage of it. So my point is that if their guys are using more water, our costs will increase based on
No,
that.
our costs don't increase based on their using more water.
Well, because if they spend $1 million a month, I don't know what it is, right? $1 million a month to operate their system and we use 6% of it, we pay $60,000 of that, right? If their cost goes to $1.2 million a month and we're using 6% or 5%, we pay 5% of that cost, right?
We,
So,
we are paying, they calculate the cost to treat per gallon, and then that's multiplied by the gallons that we use.
okay, so that kind of solves it, okay.
Yeah, so
Okay, so never mind on that. But, you know, part of it is too, is if we're trying to deal with peak demands, if that's our major issue, I mean, a solution to that, and I don't know if that's something we do, we are the water system though, is, I mean, I see my neighbor's sprinklers go off when it's raining every time, right? So, you know, if we really want to solve that problem, I mean, we should look at somehow subsidizing like smart watering systems. I have one in my house that shuts off those sprinklers. So I think you would probably see, if you want to look at peak demands, you probably see a lot significant decrease just due to those types of factors that we could do or help incentivize people to do. So instead of just charging more money based on that and based on that volume. So.
The only thing I would say, Scott, is I think we need to be aware of is, as Jenny mentioned, Albany's moving. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they go away from this. It's just because of what they had to do, because of what we just talked about, the very purpose. The reason Albany's rates are up so high is for that very reason, is because they weren't maintaining, it wasn't the infrastructure going in, and because they saw such growth in their demand, that they had such large costs in infrastructure costs, that their rates are high now, and until those, that's part of the problem, I think, where you're seeing that right now.
And also, they have 3 blocks over there.
Yeah.
And so they that they have to deal with, and so trying to smash that down, probably go to 2 blocks first and like that. But there's other costs besides capital or pipes in the ground. There's regulatory costs, and so you have to keep that in mind too. That everybody can stay exactly the same, and the costs are going to go up because of the regulatory costs. And so it's not just a big industrial user comes in and now you have to build a bigger pipe or a bigger piece of the treatment plant. It's everybody has to pay for the increase in regulatory costs that are happening.
Don, you've been really, really quiet.
I think with the water especially, commercial and industrial, they're pretty much locked in. They have to use X amount, and that doesn't really vary that much. It's a residential that we can do some training, because you can drive through the housing projects and you see water running down the streets every day. And some of these people, and to make them more aware, and we have to make some changes soon, because if we don't, then we're gonna have a 10%, then you're gonna hear the screaming and yelling. But I think people would be hard pressed, at 3% wouldn't hurt anybody, and they would be hard pressed to find anything that's gone up less than 3% in the last 7 years for water and 5 years for sewer. Everything's gone up, and we haven't, so we have to do something.
And what's your thoughts on the rate structure, though? I mean, they're changing the rate structure.
For the residential,
Yeah.
I think it should go up.
Should it be even, or should it be volume?
It should be volume.
Volume.
I feel it should be volume, because some people, and it's not that I have a small place, it's like I say, I see some sprinklers running 3 hours.
Heat of the day, all those
And
places
it's
you're not
running
supposed
right
to.
down the road. You can go to any of the housing projects and see water running down the gutter.
Don's yard is so small, his wife mows the yard with a battery-powered lawnmower.
No, it isn't that, but she waters crazy. Oh man, does she go crazy.
Your place is beautiful.
So do you think that it should be the same price then for no matter how much volume you use, or I use up to a certain amount of volume and then my price drops a little bit, or what do you kind of,
I think.
Do you think it should go up, maybe?
I
I
think
mean-
it should be the same.
the same?
The same. That way, nobody can say, well, just because he's got a small yard, why does he have to pay more? Because he waters a little more. But also, we have to stress the conservation thing and quit wasting it.
Can I add something on the conservation side real quick? We do have a water management conservation plan that talks about
Right.
these ideas, and those are things that are kind of on our list to get through too. If they are higher priorities, we can move them up in the list, but there are a lot of public outreach things that we can do that are separate from our rates and trying to push people to do it, but more of a carrot to get people to do
Yeah,
it.
the carrot. Rather than shoving it down the throat, hey, help us.
I'm just still amazed that the heat makes you use more water. And that's not because I know you water your yard, but I literally haven't touched my sprinkler system since I moved in 12 years ago. It waters this every time about June. I turn it on, it waters, then I turn it off about September, and June comes around again, and it waters as it does. So to me, it's like it's a more calculated approach. This is what's going to happen. This is what we build it for.
And you can see, if you were to look at, and Albany, we could probably get it from Albany, but if you were to look at based on temperature of the day, and you look at what happens on the flows coming out of the plant, you would be amazed.
Well, I'm sure it goes up, but what I'm saying is
It's significant.
it's just like, if it's 90 degrees out, I don't water my yard more than if it's 80 degrees out. If it's 70 degrees out in summertime, I don't water it anymore.
Yeah, but, yeah, you got, I mean, it's significant. I can remember when we would see, and there was, I mean, you can literally see on the graph with temperature how it peaks. I know prior to the new facility, there was times that because they would be down, we'd get phone calls at the department because there was areas of town that didn't, if we had a fire, there was concern whether we'd have enough water because they pulled the reservoirs and stuff down so low.
I mean, still, I'm going back to the smart watering systems, because those things are just awesome. I finally put one in my house, and that just really saves a lot of water. So if that's our concern, to me, that's a good approach, versus I'm going to bill you for it, and then you're going to have to figure it out on your own. So, but that's my 2 cents on it.
You guys can approach it however you want. I don't think the rate structure is intended to discourage water use. It's to allocate the cost fairly across the system. Discouraging water use might be if we were looking at an inclining block structure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But discouraging water use through conservation is a whole nother thing that we can definitely go into.
Yeah, I think the biggest is I have a 10,000 square foot lot, and X has a half-acre lot. Why is he getting a lower rate for the use of his water to keep his area green than what anyone else has to pay?
Of course, you can make that argument of, to run that line across the street in front of your house and have that meter sitting there cost the exact same as the guy with a half-acre lot to run his line or have the line in the street with a meter
Right,
sitting
but why
there.
is
So
it
there should
after
be
he
some sort of
uses more
discount.
water per month than you are, is he paying less for that same?
Because all the infrastructure costs the same. That meter costs the same. So there's no price decline.
But it's based on what it's costing the city. So our rate is based on what we're costing the city. So what you're saying is you're giving them a break. Someone else is paying at a higher rate. When the declining block, there are people that are paying more for water. You're giving those higher users, you're giving them a break.
Only on the water over a certain. So to me, in a system,
You're
it's
still
just
getting
like
a
a
break, though,
business.
Scott.
But you're getting a break on the upper. So there's fixed costs, right? There's the fixed cost that costs me to operate the system, correct? There's the fixed cost of the maintenance of the system, flushing lines, so forth, so on. Those are all fixed costs. Whether me as a customer, I use 6 CCF a month or I use 12, all those costs are fixed. So the only differences are in the cost system is maybe a little bit more wear and tear on the system that I put on it by using more water. And maybe also would be the treatment cost to Albany. So if you divide those out, and that's why I'm saying that it should cost less once you get up to a volume on that.
So if, from a business standpoint, if you were selling something, you're going to give someone a break based on the volume they're doing?
Absolutely. That's absolutely how you do that.
Yes, you do.
But
Yes, you do. I don't know anybody otherwise. You won't have a
If you're dealing with
business.
quantity, yes, you do.
But your goal there is to sell a product and
Product.
to make a profit, and that's how this system
We're
was
not.
initially set up. Our goal is to cover the cost of the system.
Equitably.
And so is it fair, does it make sense to give someone a break on water usage for using more when we're not there to make a profit and to generate more business, we're there to spread the cost over the whole
So to
system.
get to the end, we need to be just raise the rates that much higher to cover that
Yep.
decreased rate over here.
That's what the result is.
And that's what's always
Because we
the
have
cost.
to get to this end point.
Well,
That's what I personally see is if we need to increase the rate 6%, which is kind of what I saw just looking at it in the top. I know you had the 3, but we really dropped down. So I was seeing like 6% the first couple years. It was just my quick glance at it. Then that would just be basically take our structures today, raise it 6% for the next 3 or 4 years or whatever it gets us there. Then maybe we turn to a 3% after that to keep our costs up there. But as far as changing those rate block structures, that isn't. Again, it's gonna be hard to convince me of that because I just look at economies of scale in that, and my system costs so much money to have.
I guess-
So, now, if you told me that if the guys use another CCF per month of water, then we're going to have to build a whole new water treatment plant. But there might be some, something we would look at with that with some penalties or something for using over. I don't know. I mean, that's a
Ultimately,
big thing.
ultimately, that's what you're doing.
That's the-
Because what you're encouraging, and that's what we're trying to say, if you go back and you look historically, I imagine Deb can speak to this and Jenny, when you have that declining rate block, the reason there's no other cities doing that is because it encourages the use of water. Because if you know that, okay, I'm actually paying less now, so I'm gonna go ahead and water more, and your usage is going up faster,
you're gonna be to that point where you have to increase your capacity. And that's going to be costly. When you get to that next level, you have to come in and either add capacity, storage capacity, or other things. That's where your big dollar ticket items come in on your water system. So you are encouraging that. That's why everyone else has gone away from that, is so that you don't want to penalize them. That's not what we're saying, but why do we want to encourage a higher use of water than what?
Well,
I think
that's what you're doing with that-
The investment that
that
you've already
portion.
made
Yeah.
is in that plant, in the capital part of the plant is built into the rate through the debt service. And so by recovering, and part of that was driven by the peak demand and your share. And so it's just assigning that higher cost to residential customers as a whole to recover that throughout the year through each unit of water, and not giving anybody a break or otherwise. It's just that everybody's going to contribute to that cost with every unit of water that they use.
But I have yet to run into somebody, because I personally think our water rates here are just as a whole, not Millersburg versus other cities, but just as a whole, to bring water into my house, I think it's quite a bit of money to do it. So I have yet to run into somebody, or one of my neighbors or whatever, to say, you know what, water here is so cheap, I'm going to leave this hose on all day. So I mean, I don't have anybody, I haven't ran into a single person who said that.
I
So,
can't tell
in fact,
you.
I've heard a lot of complaints about, I've got to fill up my pool this month, so that's going to cost me $300 So my point is, I think that conservation is kind of there, and we have larger lots, so, you have that volume discount part of it. So.
What we do here is from a lot of residents that move out here from Albany, and they make comments about how much lower our rates are, and they use more water because of it. So that is, I mean, I can tell you, and I think I don't know if you've looked at where our rates are compared to surrounding communities, but we're low compared to communities around us.
We did have a citizen actually say that in Albany, they couldn't fill their pool up, but now they can get a pool because our rates are cheaper. I actually had a citizen say that
That's going to be an individual.
last year, but
Yeah,
It's
that's going to be
pretty-
an
pretty
individual.
typical.
it was interesting.
I mean, I was just in Coeur d'Alene last week, and I had people complaining because their water rates got so high during the summer. And I asked, well, how much is that? They said $40 a month. So that was their high rate. So, I mean, we can compare this to multiple different areas, but just saying, I don't know anybody who turns their hose on and leaves it and doesn't care because the water's cheap.
That was a little bit of my point. I have no idea what the water costs me or how much I use. So I'll be honest, but my grass gets watered, no matter how cheap that water is, the same amount of times every year for 12 years.
Yeah.
Just how it
As
works.
evidenced by the phone calls
You
we
could have
got
told me
last
that
year,
it
you're not
was
the
free
only one.
after a certain amount of water. I've been like, I'm still only gonna water what I water.
And at first, regardless of how much it probably costs, you're probably gonna keep it water.
Right.
You're 1 in 100, your conscience is enough about it to take care of it.
Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter which way you want to go.
Right.
The question is, so that when we have people coming in and wanting to, it's hard for us to explain to people. I'll tell you, when we have our customers come in and want to know, why is my neighbor who's using 10 times the amount of water I'm using getting a lower rate than what I am? And they have a hard time, and that's really difficult for us to explain to them on it. And so that's just one of the facts. I mean, there isn't it's difficult for us to tell them, well, this is why, because they're using more water. And they say, well, isn't that, with them using more water, doesn't that drive our costs up in the long run? Well, yes, it does. But so they have a hard time. I understand where you're coming from, but it's really hard when we have those customers. And I would say probably 50%, because we have a lot of seniors out here, and all we hear from them is the cost of their services. And when they find out that, I'm being, why should I pay a higher rate than my neighbor over here that's using twice the amount of water than in a year? So they're not concerned about what their bill is, they're concerned about what that rate is after it goes past this point. And we hear about it constantly, so.
But I have two arguments to that. That'd be a simple explanation to me. Up to 6 CCF, you guys pay the exact same. So if you use more water and then it's 6 CCF because of a volume, it goes down. And second off so they're paying the same. But second off on that,
Should go up.
But they don't understand that, Scott, they don't understand
okay,
why.
but then we can make the argument of the industrial customers. Why are they cheaper then? They use way more on the system. Why are they $2? So we should explain that to them. Because I'll tell you,
That's a lot
if
easier
you-
to explain to them, to be honest with you.
What do you tell them? Volume?
We don't pay the meter reader, we don't pay all that maintenance, all those 2,000 houses out there, we're not paying lots of costs for each, that we would pay for individual residences throughout the city.
Yeah.
It's much, much simpler to support an industrial.
If we look at the amount of residential, the amount of things, capital and stuff that we have to maintain for residential for the same flow on an industrial customer.
Oh, I don't disagree.
It's night and day.
Oh, you could really look at every service and see that with residential versus industrial, but yeah.
Process question. Do we have one more item to talk about yet?
That's a question for you guys when we're done with this.
Well, we're kind of going in circles.
We don't have to.
We're kind of going in circles. I just wanted to, is there anything we haven't said already at least 3 times? Okay, then, what do you have to now?
Oh, no, I was talking about
We need to address
the
this.
other, the TMDL is a whole separate thing.
Yeah.
And
What-
let's
what is-
finish
what is
this and then
TDM?
decide.
What's that stand for?
Well,
You don't know.
it's not a stormwater permit, but it's a stormwater
Oh,
program. So it's
gotcha.
a whole separate thing than this. We can
We can
stay and
do
do
it
it
next
tonight, or
month.
we can do it another time.
That's okay.
It's up to you. But we should finish this over here.
We need to know where we're gonna go with rates.
Well, you know where I stand, so.
I'm gonna go to the store, I'm gonna buy a bone and put it by your nameplate.
You're gonna put what on his
A
name?
bone.
A bone.
Oh.
It's like a dog with a bone.
I haven't heard any arguments that really make sense to me, so. I understand the concepts, and to me, that's conservation, but I don't,
Yeah, it's
and there's
not-
other ways to
it's-
do
it's
that,
not-
so therefore.
Yeah, I think it's not conservation. It's making sure that we are distributing the costs fairly and equally in a way that we can explain to our customers. That's the bottom line.
But if somebody uses more water out of the same meter, out of the same lines, out of the same line running in front of his house with one meter reader running by, whether he's reading 6 CCF or 12 CCF, that does not cost me more money. So therefore, that doesn't make sense to me. So,
That I could argue for a single base charge to cover all those fixed costs and a unit cost on all the water you use.
yeah, that,
Right?
yeah, I'd be
Which
interested
is
in
what we
that.
have. Right. We have a base charge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Base charge for that, and then we have a unit cost for water under this volume
Yeah,
base.
uniform volume.
Uniform volume that is the same for every unit of water.
Right.
And that's how we are right now. It's just that we have 2 blocks, the 2 blocks, and what we're talking about is you still have a base charge that covers all that, and then you have your
That gets you
So what you're saying is the base charge covers my meter readers, my infrastructure, my lines in the ground, my meters, my,
It covers a portion of that.
exactly. So it's built into that next 6 CCFs with your 55 cents. And then once I get over whatever that point is, and I don't know who came up with 6 CCFs, I'm not sure, somebody hopefully did. Picked a number, and after that, there's kind of a volume side of it. So that's right. Now, I would be for.
You just hit the nail on the head. Who picked that number, at what point they go to a lower rate?
I think
We
it's the
don't have a way of
average
justifying
use during the winter, because they're figuring that at 6 CCFs, that is more of an irrigation summer usage, because if you look at it, that was our average during the winter. So, I mean, I'm assuming that was their concept.
But we
So,
don't have to.
But again, it's that summer use that drives the peak, that drives the additional capacity needed, so it absolutely is more expensive in the
but
summer.
if we
For
bought
to pay
everybody
for that
smart
summer.
irrigation boxes,
Well,
you know.
We don't want to
then-
be buying.
Yeah.
Well, but hold on, that's what PPL does for power, right? There was LED bulbs, you got a discount on that,
Well,
that's
even
through
if you're
Energy
using
Smart of
water
Oregon.
efficiently,
or-
it's
I mean,
still
there's-
more expensive, still more expensive, because
Sure.
we're sizing the system for that larger demand, which you pay for throughout the year through that additional capacity, through that additional cost.
To me, it mimics Albany's. I say we stay with the block system. I'm interested, obviously, I've said for a while, we need to increase rates. I would,
She said Albany's changing.
no, Albany's not changing.
Their goal is to move away.
They have a goal.
Well, they're moving away from it with incremental steps because of where they
We'll
were.
be talking to him, you meeting Thursday night? Who's that?
I think it's Scott Cowan.
Scott Cowan.
Or was it? I think it's Scott Cowan.
It's Cowan, it's
Yeah,
Cowan.
well, Scott, yeah, he's back Thursday.
Yeah, so,
Whatever we do, there's this fine report and a beautiful report.
yes, thank you.
Within 2 years, we're gonna have to do something, and I would much rather see some 3% than a 10 or 15%, because then you're gonna have them lined up outside with tar and feathers. And, 3%, and like, we can justify that, that's 7 years for water. I didn't realize it had been that long. And 5 years for sewer, that's I think we'd be hard pressed to find many cities that have gone that long without increases.
I was pulled into that, I just got I had just got elected in November, and the city council pulled me into a meeting. I'm not sure how they justify executive session on this, but that's what it was. And they decided to initiate 50% of the rate increase that was required to lessen the blow, and then do it the rest next year. It never happened, it didn't happen the next year.
I remember that, 10, 10, and 10, they were going 10, 10, 10 to get ahead of the curve, and it never happened. It happened one year?
2014.
Yeah.
Be there?
That was one of my first things.
Yeah.
But that was where council decided not to change the sewer rate structure, because that was what was on the table at the time,
Right.
and go with the increases.
Yep.
But I think what Deb has presented is a much clearer picture of how that would take place than what was presented at that
Yeah.
point.
I think we're overdue probably for an increase. I'm still, and maybe I just don't get it, but it seems pretty simple to understand. Say, if it costs you more than peak time, again, I'm going, for 12 years, I've done the exact same thing, so that should just be how it's factored when you build a treatment plant. It either, you know that we're here, like, treatment plants are probably built different in Arizona than they are here, right? Because they're gonna use more water all year round no matter what, so that's their norm. So 3 months out of the year, everybody in the entire state of Oregon is gonna use more water in those 3 months. That's just how your treatment plant's built. That's how all your, and so you're gonna say, this is the norm. It don't cost us more. It costs us this no matter what, so this is how we base all of our fees off of, right? It doesn't, sure, it taxes the system more, but we know ahead of time that that's how it's gonna be built. In my mind, that's just how, how you calculate what size to build it at. Not that you're going, we have to build it because this is gonna cost us more money because people are gonna use more. We already know that, so that's just the expense. Now, what is that expense? You know what I'm saying? We need to charge more because we know that they're gonna use more. Well, we've already based our charges off of the fact that we know we have to build a plant to handle this in the summertime. You know what I'm saying? I don't get the
I don't think
the
we're saying that
justification.
you have to, I don't think we're saying we're charging more, but we are, you are paying, with the declining block that we have right now, we know that our cost is X.
Sure.
So if our declining block, we have declining block, and we're charging less down here at this point, this number up here is gonna be higher, the initial 6. So those people who never use over 6 are always gonna pay more than the average what you're gonna pay. So that's where the problem comes in with the declining blocks. If you look at what you're paying average per unit of water, you're paying a lower level than someone that's not using the same amount, whether it's because they have less numbers in their household than what you have, or other reasons. And that's where they have a hard time understanding. Why should I be supplementing your lower rate? Because that's where they look at it. Because if that wasn't there and everyone paid it across the board, their rate is a lower rate.
That's right.
So that's where they have. So if you look at that 255 right now with the declining block, Grant, you're not seeing that because we're trying to address what we haven't done. But the bottom line is, they're paying at a higher rate than what your average rate is. So if you're using 12 units, you're paying, your average monthly unit cost is, you're paying a less rate than they are.
Yep.
And that's what they don't understand. And you can't, I don't know how you can justify that to them.
Well, to me, it's, again, just getting back to it's pretty simple. That first 6, 12, whatever the number is you want to call it, that's what the system costs everybody. So if you want to use more water to get that lower rate, if you can, for some reason, buy another pool or do whatever you need to do, great, you get the lower rate. But again, it's got to cost something the same for everybody to pay for the system, to build the system. But after that, do you need that to build the next system? Or the system after that?
I guess what I'm saying is, when you look at what our costs are for us as a city, based on what she has ran, we know that we need to bring in X amount of dollars
Sure.
for the system to
Yeah.
operate and to make all of the capital improvement needs and everything else that we have identified in our plan. So what's happening with the declining block rate, you're saying, okay, but I want those people to, that are only going to use 6, whatever your number is, they're going to pay at a higher per unit cost than what those are over here. So it's, from a fairness standpoint, that's where it comes in. I mean, if that's what the council wants to do, but I think you just need to understand that if you have the citizens coming in and asking you about it, why are you charging someone that's using more water, giving them a lower rate
across the board. It's not just the declining blocks. You got to look at what their total cost is per month. You're paying a lower cost for the same level of basic. So the basic's there, but you have to look at what our total operating cost is for it. We're not out setting funds for we're not designing for that. We're looking at what our cost is to maintain and provide the service that we have.
You can establish a lower rate for a different type of class that's using water differently. You cannot establish that within a certain class of residential, that larger users should be paying less. That's just, the numbers just don't support that.
Well, but they aren't paying less. Their bill is still more money. So to me, I look at it as you have your base rate, and let's say, I'm assuming when they brought this up, they said it costs us $2 per CCF to provide service the water, treat it, et cetera. But we still have more cost for the system, which is my meter readers and my lines in the system and so forth. So that's that extra 55 cents, right? So it's very simple. You're really paying $2 for the water that you use, and that additional 55 cents is for my meter readers and my fixed cost to run the system, okay? But you shouldn't have to pay that 55 cents once you reach over that 6 CCF, because I've already covered all those costs. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm assuming that's how they came up with this plan, because that's how I would have done it.
We can
So
run the numbers differently, but I would say that the 255 at 6 units is not covering that usage, which you say that would have to be a much broader.
well, I'm sure maybe there's still some built into the over 6, but it's obviously it's going to go down. The more water I use, the more those fixed costs goes down. The meter reader doesn't charge me more money. So I guess is my thing.
Would it make it easier to visualize or understand if the base charge really covered all those fixed costs and then the unit charge was just for the water usage? I mean, is that one way to look at it that would feel more fair?
Yeah, have you, that's a great question. Have you actually done that, said, hey, this is after we pay for all the infrastructure, this is what water actually costs somebody? Has anyone done that?
What you do is look at your infrastructure cost. You have a base rate, and then everyone's paying a per unit cost. But that per unit cost, keep in mind, includes those CIP needs and everything else that you have, not just for treatment. We're not talking just for treatment. And that's what I'm saying is when you look at that $1 million, treatment is just a very small portion of that. The majority of that is the capital needs costs. So where people have a hard time understanding that is those capital needs costs now and in the future that we're looking at are driven by those people that are using larger amounts. So why are they paying a lower cost per unit of water than what I am, who's not the one that's going to drive those capital needs costs to a higher level in the future? That's where they have a hard, what I hear from them when they come in and you try to explain to them, they don't get, why should I be paying more per unit cost average than what someone who's actually the ones that are going to be driving those higher costs 15, 20, 30 years, 40 years down the road. So that's where they don't. So if we had that, if you're to look at that, and here's where our base rate is for that, and then your unit costs, everyone's across the board, I think that's much easier from a residential standpoint.
Bring back some
I couldn't argue with that.
brings
I mean,
the costs and-
That'd
And I understand
be
what you're-
interesting to see that number too, because that gives you a comparison, and then you kind of look at it and go.
I understand where you're
Yeah.
both saying, it's
Yeah.
just in the inverse, what we deal with a lot of seniors.
It sometimes, to me, that's kind of how this system is built, but the problem is I already know when you get this fixed cost, so it's going to be very interesting information, and maybe that's a way to go. But it's going to be an interesting thing, but what we're probably going to see is that they kind of built this rate structure the way they did up to the 6 CCF is because what about that person who uses one? You know, and let's say that base rate's $150 a month or $100 a month, right? And they only use 1 CCF. And I think that's kind of how they built the rate structure to kind of help with that. So,
I would keep in mind, the rate structure you see now was put in by a for-profit company.
Yeah.
So, and it was, because what we're based on is something that was put in when Pacific Power owned the facility. So they were there for profit. So for them at the point, they had the capacity and it was to their advantage to sell as much water. So they gave a discount because they wanted to sell it. We're not a for-profit company. We're not out there trying to sell our capacity. We want to have that capacity available when we need it. But that's the only thing I would just keep in mind is, keep in mind that the rate structure that we have today, the basis for that was based on the rate structure per profit company was using, and they had capacity back 30, 40 years ago, and they never changed it 50 years ago. That's how our rate structure we have today here is based on. It was based on Pacific Power's rates when, because I think Pacific Power, I think Albany bought it about the time Millersburg became a city.
In the 80s.
Yeah, so about 6 years after. So then they really wasn't out here at that point. Albany started, that's when Millersburg started expanding the system out here. So I think it's important to keep in mind is you don't see, that's why you don't see any other municipalities using this type of structure, because it was based on a for-profit company that
I
was.
think something else that could be brought back up again is when Deb put up that chart, that slide that showed all the reasons why you go to modernized rates and
Yeah.
everything. And equitability is key, and it's equitability across the entire class.
Right.
The entire residential class should be paying that same rate.
But going to a fixed cost with a per unit cost for unit 1 to unit 100, however many units that you use, obviously, would kind of solve that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So why don't we look at that and see what that ends up being, and we can bring that back.
And maybe that you drop the unit cost down a little bit, but then you spread that other cost across all of them with your unit costs.
It'd be interesting to see. It's more definitive to me than going back and forth on what people perceive.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
So
I think the reason we've-
Capital,
Yeah, it includes all.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think one reason for what was presented today was trying to stick as close to what we have now
Yes.
in the way it's set up as possible, because it's less of a shock to people.
Exactly.
When you move.
When you move, yeah.
Yep.
So if we have that base rate similar at a smaller amount now,
Yep.
that is less of an adjustment for people, but we can look at
Absolutely.
this option.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, we'll try
essentially,
to break it up in terms of fixed and variable and different components of the system, and then have a conversation about what you think is fair.
just keep what we were looking at, if you look at where our base rate is today with what was being proposed, we could move to that, they'd only see a 3% rate increase in the next 2 years, and then we would go to the 3% CPI after that. So it's a really, you look at a very straight curve, of 3% for the next 10 years,
Yep.
which is much easier for them. Depending on what we come up with, you could see some real swings for people initially.
Now, something like that would be easier for you to deal with the public too.
Oh, yeah.
Because the
Trust me.
4 of us sitting here can say, hey, do this, do this, do this. We don't have to deal with the public on a day in and day out basis, and some of them can get pretty rough.
Yes.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah, when you're talking, it's amazing to hear people come in and talk about their utility bills.
Kim and Jake get the
Yeah,
brunt of
Kim
that.
and
ask-
Jake and ask to get the brunt of it. And I'll be honest with you, the most vocal is our seniors, and they don't understand it.
Of course.
Until
And,
they got people got their first summer season bill last year.
Yeah.
It was bad. All the new people moving in, they thought we upped our rates.
Oh, because of the bi-monthly.
Well, not the bi-monthly, but the fact that they use so much water.
Oh, got it.
They were getting $350 bills and couldn't understand why, and they thought we upped our rates. I was like, no, you upped your consumption. It was a big deal.
That's $300 some.
Yes, some
Oh, yeah.
even higher.
I'm up north of that.
Yeah, that's,
I can't believe you're using more
the
water than that.
sprinklers running 24/7 and stuff like that.
I think I'm
Oh, I
less now
learned
because I
my
have a new
lesson
smart
this year.
sprinkler system. but-
I let mine run a lot last year, but I won't be doing that this year.
Yeah.
How green you like your lawn?
What's that?
So how green do you like your lawn?
Yeah.
A lot less than mine is
one of
right
the things to keep in
now.
mind is with the number of new homes we have coming in, people have an initial
Yes.
yard, their landscapers are telling them to make sure,
More
10 minutes
costly.
a day,
I'm using way less
2
now than I
times a day.
did, yeah, 3 years ago,
Because when you
yeah.
first put the lawn in, they want to make sure it gets established, you don't
Yeah.
kill stuff
Right.
and get it established, so.
This is fun.
So we probably need to have another work session.
Yeah.
That's the next step, is
Yep.
another work session.
Is the,
Tomorrow night.
Sorry,
our normal July, one of the things I did want to talk, our normal July work session would be the week of the 22nd, I believe.
You're out.
I am out.
Yeah.
If we move that to the following week, we have 5 weeks in July, if I remember correctly, looking at the calendar.
Yes.
Let's do the 30th.
Would July 30th work for a work session with with those of you that are here,
Will that work for Deb
and Deb.
and Jenny?
She said it,
The
Yeah.
30th? At 4 o'clock still?
Yes.
I can do it.
Yeah, you say that, we're retired.
Yeah,
We have to check,
details.
Deb, does that
Yeah,
work for you?
At 4 o'clock again, you said?
4 o'clock?
Yeah.
30th?
The 30th.
That'd be good.
Good for you?
Yep.
Yeah.
That gives at least 4. Hopefully Scott will be available, not out on a conflagration somewhere.
We'll meet
Fire
out on
season.
Woods Road.
I was gonna say fire season's
Yeah.
kicking off, yeah.
Thank you.
it worked out well.
All right, so is there anything else?
Thank
Any
you.
other closing comments from anybody? Other comments about other topics? Come prepared really well on July 1st, next Monday. With a good sense of humor,
Your
and
package picture.
objectivity, and read your packets and be prepared.
352 pages, is that right?
325 about. Did you
345.
want, we didn't print one for you because I didn't hear from you. Do you want a printed copy? Because we can have one ready for you tomorrow.
Maybe for some notes. I started reading it today and
Okay.
there was some, it's hard to write on
You
my
didn't fall
kid's
asleep,
screen.
did you?
Hey, I'm not gonna, I guess I'm drinking this for a reason. It got rough a few times.
Well, thank you for your help.
Thank you.
See you again
Okay.
soon.
Thank you.
All right, so then I'm going to adjourn, unless somebody's got a better idea.
Real
Oh,
quick,
he's got.
Real quick,
the TMDL.
yeah, so I just, since we're not gonna go over it tonight, I just wanted to explain what this is real quick. So you can take it and read it for, we may do the council meeting.
Yeah, I think
That's weird.
we have a, I'm not gonna say this, we have a light agenda right now.
Kevin.
I didn't say the other board and meeting, I just said we have a light agenda. So we'll probably go ahead and just add this to that agenda.
Okay.
So this is, TMDL is, total maximum daily load is what it stands for.
I knew that, yeah.
But the term is used for multiple things, and I have a little presentation that I'll go over then that kind of walks through what this is and why I'm making you sit through another stormwater quality discussion. But this is our TMDL implementation tracking matrix. Is a program required by DEQ, similar to the MS4, but not the same. And this is what we have finally settled on with DSL, or DEQ, sorry, as our new matrix for the next 5 years. So this says basically what we can do to help these pollutant factors in the Willamette River over the next 5 years. And I'll go through the details of, because this really gets into what's in our stormwater funding. Stormwater fund is going to fund some of the activities that are in here. So, and it's required for me to go over it with you as part of our DEQ obligations.
Okay. So if we read it, it'll be easier for you to do this next,
If you read it, you'll probably get more out of it next time.
yeah, okay.
It'll help you be prepared and have a better understanding.
Lots of reading.
This one might require another energy drink.
If you don't read it, we'll still go over it, so.
Or some kind of drink.
Yeah.
Jim, did we officially, I didn't think we officially.
I haven't adjourned yet, got ready to, and I got stopped here, got stiff arm, so.
Hey, one-
Any other comments from anybody?
Yeah, one quick that I just thought of, not gonna go back into the whole discussion here, but just if we did the rate structure change, the 255 across the board, basically that's going to increase because of our peak demands. It's going to put all of that increase into just those 3 months that those peak demands go on. So I know it said 3% increase for their bills overall. You're gonna take that 3% and you're gonna put it into those 3-month period, basically. So that's something to think of. So people are complaining about their high rates during the summer. That rate during those 3 months is gonna go up 12%?
Well,
Right,
it'd still
to
be
make up for all that roughly.
Still be 3%.
No, because you're looking at 3% across the board for the yearly average.
During those months, they'll see a higher percent.
Yeah, during those 3 months of
Right.
summer, they're gonna see like a 12% roughly. I'm just saying it's 3 months long, right? So if they're already complaining about those high bills during that summer, they're gonna definitely be in here if we did that. Just food for thought, so.
I think knowing the information that she's gonna bring back regardless of what we do, is gonna be easier. I'm looking at it as easier to explain to people that ask, why did my bill go up? Well, this is why.
Yes.
Okay, also one last comment, again, back to Monday's meeting, remember, it's also at 6 o'clock, not 6:30 on Monday.
Can you say it
Oh,
again?
Monday.
6 o'clock on the first.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else? Going once? We're adjourned. Thank you.